I've ordered you 10 of my followers' solo cash cup games to figure out the mistakes that they made and collect them into one useful video. Like, go follow my Twitter, I'm going to do this more. I chose players who placed somewhere between 5,000 up till 100, so let's start with the lowest placing of Meko, which was 4,333. This season is very Spider-Man heavy, and Meko makes a critical mistake that many players make, which is just landing on low levels. At the start of the moving zones, he had 108 builds left, tons of Spider-Man charges, definitely set up to go deep into this game. However, every single time he used the Spider-Man's web shooters, he just landed on a low layer. If he'd just gone up a couple more layers, he would have such better sightlines over the players who were at the back side of the zone rotating, and he could have picked up way more eliminations. He ultimately ended up choking up the final 1v1 and losing, but he placed a second with 0 eliminations when he definitely could have had a bunch more from just staying on higher layers. It's not just endgame where the layers become important. The 5th zone looking for launch pads, this is critical that you are up high. Pain King shows us a great example of why you should not be on a low ground layer at 5th zone. You can see the visibility he has from this layer. Absolutely nothing. Now this is the moment where the launch pad goes off, but unfortunately he's trying to fight a player at the backside of the zone. Another critical mistake, but not the main one we're covering right now. Ironically, the launch pad that he would have been looking for was directly above him by only 2 tiles, so he would have found it there, but instead he decided to fight players at the backside of zone, which resulted in him being held by many other players and inevitably dying to the player that he was trying to fight. One of the keys to getting a high leaderboard placement is ensuring that you get off spawn very consistently. And a really common mistake that players make off spawn is not to continually pressure the opponent who is contesting you. In this example, Zitty's main drop spot was overly contested, so he dipped out and grabbed enough loot to fight, which was great, but he did not harvest enough materials in order to push into this fight. Now he was pushing into a place that was contested, knowing that this player has won a fight. This means that he has a ton of materials. With Zitty only having 9 builds, this is definitely not going to be enough. To worsen this, he didn't pressure the opponent enough. Once he snuck up here, he just sat on this corner and didn't start actually trying to take angles, take shots. He just waited for the opponent to come round to him. Now the issue with this is that as he did this, the opponent was looting, he was harvesting materials, and ended up getting a huge advantage in terms of loot. This hiding situation probably would have worked if he had enough materials to start with, because then he wouldn't have been at a disadvantage because he already had good enough HP. However, because he only had 9 mats, he had to be more aggressive and try to get a bigger beam off to start the fight and then instantly jump into the box and finish it quickly. You can't just try and take a fair 50-50 fight when you don't have enough materials like this. Please harvest your materials in your early game. As you can tell, most of the common issues are to do with fighting other players, and Jimmy Man 03 or Luke, I don't know which one it is. I actually don't even know if this is the right account, but I think it maybe is no different. This is an issue that I see in passive players a ton, and it's doing nothing in endgame. Notice how he's boxed up, and in this specific situation, this man sits here for 21 seconds. Now, the point of staggering is that you get ahead of the zone, open up, look back, and pick up those eliminations on the players behind you. However, if you just sit in your box and wait for the zone to catch up, nothing's going to happen. He did a great job of staggering, getting ahead, but ultimately he got 0 refreshes, 0 eliminations in the end game because he straight up didn't look for them. Just because you're more of a passive player, not aggressive player, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be looking for eliminations as much as you possibly can be. Now, Doric ended up going down in mid-game a ton. There's a lot of games where he went down from the 30th up to kind of 50th placement mark, which is all basically mid-game issues. The biggest one he had was just assuming that he was safe. On this rotate, he looked around and just assumed because he couldn't see anyone that he was okay, but there was someone right behind him, sprayed him in the back, hit him with a Chapter 3 Season 1 classic, jumping in with the double SMGs, and picked up his eliminations. This could have easily been avoided if he just placed a couple wood builds behind him and he just wouldn't have got sprayed through that. Maybe he still would have got hit by a couple of the bullets, but it would have been a lot less impactful than, well, dying. This will be the second time Till has been mentioned this season. What a lucky guy, no way. Now, he started this cash cup off extremely well and choked incredibly badly towards the end, ending up finishing 1,575th, but that's not why we're talking about it. We're going to be talking about the fact that he ended up placing 3rd in that first match rather than 1st. When you go from 3rd to 2nd placement, you get 3 more points. Then when you get to the Victory Royale, you get another 5. So essentially placing 3rd here, Till has missed out on 8 placement points plus any of the elimination points. So the 18 eliminations is cool, but he crucially missed out on 8 to 10 points here. Now, when you're on high ground, ready to win a game, set up to win a game, your only focus when it's a 1v1v1 should be winning the match and maintaining high ground, letting those players down below fight. Instead, Till allowed his concentration to drop, meaning he got dropped down and the other player was able to take high ground from him. While spraying him out, rather than staying up and try to fight him up there, he ended up just dropping straight down to the low ground. Now, this was the critical error because that other player managed to maintain high ground, then both of the other players focused on him. The main goal should be to get these players to fight, not you being the one they are fighting in the middle. Now, if you're a good player, if you're able to get into the top 1k, especially if you're a player who's looking to qualify, you can have a higher elimination first game, but for most people it's too risky to have a very high elimination game. Now, the reason for this is you never know when you can be eliminated by a Stinger SMG. A lot of the players who qualify in that top 100 really only start with like a 10 elimination game or have a 10 elimination win somewhere in there. You do not need to drop a 20 bomb in this current format. So like my good friend Maximasma here, you will notice the problem is that a lot of players, especially when it gets to end game, get way too tunnel visioned on these eliminations and end up wasting a ton of time in the game. Whereas if they just switch their mindset to playing for the win and getting those placement points and getting the necessary eliminations to get themselves refreshed, this game for Max could have easily been like a 12, 13, 14, maybe even 15 elimination victory royale. Instead, he had almost max mats, max Spider-Man, loot, everything you could ever ask for, dive straight into the box. Unfortunately, there's a bit of server lag, but you know the rest. In a very similar note, Walnuts here has a very similar issue, which is the 50-50 with the SMG. Now, even when you think you have the advantage in a fight, giving that opponent the opportunity to run at you with an SMG is always a bad idea. You always need to make sure you're keeping your distance and keeping the advantage. I just made an entire video on this, but Walnuts make a classic mistake thinking he has that shot, and rather than backing up into his own box, he walks forward into the opponent, misses a bunch of shots where the opponent ends up hitting them, and yet again we see another fallen brother to the Stinger SMG. Interestingly, this opponent was on 44 HP after this, so maybe he should have won it. Mistake that a lot of top pros make, like Fly, who ended up placing 191st, was that they really underestimate the low tier players in that first lobby. You never know who you're going to get in, and yes, W keying is effective, but sometimes you should read the situation and disengage. So he pushed into Coney Crossroads, immediately started to fight one player, and picked up a really nice and easy elimination. However, instantly after picking this up, a player started to run through the box with the SMG and critically damaged him. Given he was weak, he retreated into the building to heal up to make sure that he is on an even playing field to fight, but there was multiple players around him in this area. Now, he sat here for 2 minutes and 20 seconds, using his heals, getting minimal chip damage, and not really doing anything else. There was plenty of walls he could have refarmed, he could have expanded out, so similarly to one of the early examples, he basically did nothing for 2 minutes and 20. In that time, he could have easily disengaged, gotten some materials, come back, fought and won, but instead, he just got bullied. The boy Young Bob is an avid Reisshub enjoyer and placed 142nd in this Cash Cup. You can see his first 4 games he really struggled to get into the top 10 repeatedly, but did have a great clutch with a first and second at the end. Now, this second game where he was 7th with 2 eliminations could have easily been a victory royale, but there was a massive choke. So he's claimed height with 111 builds, Spider-Man, heals, max ammo, everything. This is a game to win. Now, as I mentioned in an earlier example, maintaining high ground is the most important part of this, in particular when you have this much loot to work with. The most common way players are going to try to retake high ground from you now is that they're going to try and chop you out. There are really a couple ways that you can prevent this. Firstly, you can connect enough down below, which initially he didn't do, but as soon as the player started this the first time, he connected a little bit more. The second is to spray and focus second height as much as possible. This Bob did a really bad job of. Notice the metal right below him. This is clearly where a player is. Look at the ammunition that he has, almost 500 SMG, and at this moment Bob's just kind of doing nothing as the player is starting to chop him out. If he started to spray this player a little bit earlier, this could have prevented this initially. Now, this player down below obviously wants height, so he's going to continue to chop out, and this kind of creates a little bit of a mess. It is only when Bob starts to pressure him now that he stops going over height. But unfortunately, another player starts to go up at this moment, whilst that original player starts to chop. Unfortunately, this lack of spraying second height caused him to eventually lose it. He was forced to go down to the low ground, and he used so many of the materials trying to take the high ground and continually getting chopped out, leaving him with an attempt to jump in a box and unfortunately failing. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and learned a lot. Please subscribe if you aren't already. Peace.